These are like female dominance.
There you go. Whatever you want to call it.
It's weird about Cheyenne. We're all here before it starts.
He's recording, so you know.
Am I replacing Cheyenne in school?
My mic isn't.
All right, it's 6:30. We'll call the meeting to order and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Is that a little harder?
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Hart, if you'll take roll call, please.
Scott Meyer.
Here.
Amy Lawson.
Here.
Ed Brand.
Here.
Chris McCreight.
McCreight.
Here, we'll get that McWright next time. Tony May.
Absent.
Adam. And Alice.
We do have a quorum. First item on the agenda is to approve the meeting agenda. There will be one change, item 6A. Chris has already taken his oath of office, so we'll be skipping 6A. I'm looking for a motion to approve.
Also, there,
Oh, sorry.
change to, let's see. For item 6D, that one can also be continued to the October 19th meeting.
Okay. So 6A and 6D.
I make a motion to approve the agenda minus 6A and D to be continued.
I'll,
Or done later.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Consider approving the minutes of August 17th.
Make a motion that the meeting minutes for August 17th be approved as written.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And any abstain, that would be Chris. He was not present. We have no old business. Move on to new business. 6B. Public hearing, consider request from Jason Ratliff of 510 Business Group for an RDC endorsed three-way liquor license for a proposed restaurant within the town's Riverfront Development District at 8 South Main Street.
Yes, this item can also be continued to October 19th.
Okie dokie. Item 6C. Ben from LandWorx Engineering provide an update on the plan for proposed improvements to Landmark Park.
You can get the technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, if this hopefully.
Alex, can you see that? Thumbs up.
Just let me know and yeah.
You would state your name for the record.
I will. My name is Ben Houle. I'm with LandWorx Engineering. We helped out the Redevelopment Commission and FAI with a little master plan for the Landmark Park, Urban Park, just off Main Street there. And this is kind of an update or a summary of our findings. I was here, was about 8 or 9 months ago at this point, and presented to you what we kind of wanted to do and what we were looking at doing for the master plan. And we've gone through quite the process since then. So here's kind of the stuff that we've been working on. So we had a general discussion on the process, both with folks from the RDC, folks from the town, and from FAI. We did a kind of a stakeholder meeting with a lot of those same people, but also with the immediate neighbors, invited every immediate neighbor to the park, and some other users and other folks within the business community around Fortville. Then we actually did a public survey as well, that went out on Facebook a couple of times, but it was essentially a linked Google Doc that you had to go through and answer some questions. Hopefully you guys all did it, so you know what I'm talking about. And then from all of those things, we also went to Summerfest and presented at a table at Summerfest for anybody who happened to be coming by to take a look at what the plans were there, and then also sign them up to do the survey at the same time. So then we had outcomes from that, which we'll go over today. We have some suggested phasing potential based on both kind of the ease of getting into doing it and some pricing, but also based on what's important based on the stakeholders and the public that we found. And then we have some overall site graphics that we've developed for review as well, some schematic costs, and then some next steps. All right, so getting a little bit more into depth about what we did. The reviewing existing information kind of prior to even going out to anybody or talking to anybody. One of the things that was done kind of early on in this process was a completion of transferring that property, the Landmark Park property, from the school district over to the town. So that was completed. And then we took a look at prior parks improvements, the old master plan that was included with it as well. We got utility information. We cataloged all the other existing information that was out there as well. Every monument and plaque that was out there, and took all of that into account as well. Got more info from the Parks Department on some maintenance, and then kind of wrapped that all in a bow to then start moving into what could be done there. So then, as we talked about the stakeholder input, some of the smaller meetings, and then expanded to the direct neighbors for the bigger meetings. That was done in the basement of the church next door, and we did it on a Saturday kind of purposefully, so there wasn't work conflicts or evening conflicts with kids sports or other things that might have been going on there. And then the public input with the social media and the summer celebration, Summerfest. I would say that the survey from social media and the digital survey that we did was a pretty big success. We anticipated somewhere, we were hoping, crossing our fingers, to get somewhere probably around 100, 110 responses, just based on kind of Facebook traffic and that sort of thing. But after Summerfest and putting it up a couple of times, we ended up with 200 responses from the survey. And then, based on all of that information and some additional conversations, we went on to do the master plan, which I'll be presenting to you here today. Okay. All right, so based on the stakeholder input, this is kind of some of the responses that we heard as feedback. So just to share with you of what kind of came out of it. One of the things that was very important, especially to the neighbors, was the safety. So maintaining or improving it, the safety that's out there, make sure that it's safe and it feels safe for the users, kids, parents who are going out there to use the playground, somebody who's walking through there at dusk, those kinds of things. So those are some conversations that we had there. The Veterans Memorial, to improve on what's there, essentially. There's a Veterans Memorial plaque that's out there. There's not really a place to sit and reflect with it. The lighting that was installed for it is broken, not utilized correctly currently. And it's also not really a focal point at all. So trying to improve that, or make it somewhere that you can really sit and reflect on. Restrooms and or a shelter, one or both, or even as a combination. Keeping maintenance down and being able to utilize the shelter potentially for a rental, or even not necessarily for a rental, but if somebody wanted to reserve it for a birthday party or something like that out there as well. Maintaining the feel was very important. not necessarily making it a giant soccer field or a softball complex or putting pickleball courts in and having it be kind of an athletic complex or anything like that, but more of kind of a reflective area and then a general open space that could be utilized for a multitude of things, whether that's frisbee or pick up soccer or just walking your dog through or that sort of thing as well. The covered stage was obviously a big point to be able to utilize. There are a couple, 3 events that could utilize that right away. And you'll see in the public input here in a minute, a lot of people remember the summertime concert series that was put on there and would really like to see something like that come back. The other input that we had on that is the availability of it potentially to have an outdoor church, if the church across the street could utilize it and come over, or even as a classroom type setting. And then the entries, path, the bridge, visual cues from Main Street to be able to see and know that the park is there, and then also create better and more accessible pedestrian movement through the park. All right, this is the fun stuff. So the public survey results, this is was pretty exciting for us. I think one of the comments, one of the questions that we got when we came to you with this proposal to go ahead and try the master plan was, what if you get into it and nobody wants to do anything? And I assured you that if that happened, we'd back out. We wouldn't charge you all the money. You know, none of that stuff would happen and we'd be able to move forward from there. You guys could keep the park how you want it. It's not really what happened though. So almost everybody who was excited about seeing improvements coming to Landmark Park, there was not a single comment that was like, leave it alone, leave it exactly how it is, which was pretty amazing to me in my career. And when I've done this before, there's almost always at least one person who's pretty vocal about leave everything how it is. It's fine. That really didn't happen this time. So let's get into the survey results a little bit. Are you a Fortville resident? Right underneath that, it tells the total number of responses, 200 responses. 80% of them were Fortville residents. Again, we kind of push this a little bit at Summerfest. You get a lot of out-of-towners at Summerfest that are utilizing the park for a couple of different, for Summerfest, but as well as potentially Cammie's Cause, Winterfest, that kind of stuff as well. So we did have some out-of-towners come and also take the survey. How often do you visit Landmark Park? There's a pretty big contingent there that's 1 time per month or less. And especially again, since we kind of pushed it at Summerfest a little bit. So you'll see there's probably a bunch of those that were there for events and come there specifically for events. I think that's important for a couple of reasons. One is, yes, we definitely want to make it safe on a daily basis, but you also want to make it as attractive as possible and be able to have it versatile enough to utilize for additional events. Because you're getting tax base in, you're getting people in from other counties, other cities and municipalities that are coming in for those events and spending money in your town. So that's while that looks like a pretty big number, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing too, because they'll come in for those kind of events. And then you have the 2 to 4 times per month, 5 to 7 times per month, and more than 7 times per month. I thought it was kind of interesting that you have the more than 7 times per month in there a couple times a week at least. And I think you have, what's that say, 23. So you're talking about maybe 10 or 12% of the people who took the survey. And those are your neighbors. Those are the ones who are walking their dogs daily through there. The parents that are taking their kids to the little playground, that sort of thing as well. What type of activities do you take part in while you're at Landmark Park? Again, you can see the largest contingent there is at the bottom, which is the event contingent. These were also not, you could choose more than one answer for this. So you can see there were 166 responses there. But then there were, if you add up all those responses, it's way over 200. So people come for multiple different types of things, types of events. Go ahead. Kind of continuing with the public survey results and the types of things that we asked for. And what we were really looking for here was to get a little bit of background about who's coming, why they're coming, what they like to do, what they would like to do more of or have in the future as well. So that's how our questions were kind of aimed. So what kind of activities would you like to see at Landmark Park? Again, this was one where you could select more than one answer. You could select them all if you wanted to. But you'll see there, number 1 is the summer concert series. So you have more than 3/4 of the respondents that not only remembered the summer concert series, but also really had a good enough time that they want to see something like that come back and have it programmed. And then the very next one that's also very close is updated playground equipment. This is actually a little bit of a surprise to us. We were not as aware that was utilized as often as it is. So seeing that come up so highly on there kind of reorganized, which is exactly what it should do when we start getting input. This is not our plan. It's not FAI's plan. It's not the RDC's plan. It's the town's plan. So it's the people of the town that responded to this and are, what they want to have and what they would like to see. So that immediately kind of reorganized where our priorities might be with that. Not necessarily that means we need to change the whole thing to be a giant playground and have, ice skating or whatever, it's not necessarily like that. But that's an important element to the park, and the people who use it means that should be safe and relatively updated and that kind of thing, even if it's not, a ginormous, element. So additional ideas, what you see down there on the left side, these were all kind of items that we had listed. And then on the right side, there's an additional ideas where they were left to their own devices. They could write in an answer that they wanted to. So on that right side, those all kind of came in written a little bit differently, and then they kind of came out as separate items. So we took a look at those, and if somebody said splash pad and then somebody else said splash pad with an explanation point, that came out as two different answers. We combined those. So you can see the number one response there in the additional ideas is splash pad. Still not necessarily a huge element as compared to some of the other ones that are listed on the left side. It's got 23 respondents there, 153, I guess, on the summer concert series. You can also see that there's an other, so those were just multiple different little items here and there. And then they had update the playground, putting in a pool, having restrooms, things we didn't necessarily list on that left-hand side, but they were able to put in on their own. Go ahead. All right. So these are interesting. These were restricted where essentially you were asked, what would you like to see done as an improvement at Landmark Park? And shelter was listed, and then it would say, is this a very important, somewhat important, give or take, not very important, or not at all important element to you? And so you can see you could only vote once out of those 5 for shelter, for instance. So if you add all of those up, they don't necessarily come out to 200, but it'll be close. Some people skipped a question here or there, but so it'll be pretty close. But you couldn't vote for very and give or take. So it's restrictive in that fashion. So you can also see I've kind of outlined 3 of them, the shelter, the stage, and the playground, mostly because those were kind of the highest elements. The scale differs a little bit, so that's kind of why I called them out this way. You can see on the shelter, very or somewhat are 61 and 63, totaling about 121. So that's a pretty substantial majority there. Stage 62 and 54. So that's 106 also, or 116, also pretty large majority. Playground probably had the single most that is very important, and that was at 121 just on its own. Then you have the Veterans Memorial, which was still, especially if you add up kind of the top 3, it was still one of the higher ones there. The path and the water feature, also relatively popular. So everybody liked everything essentially, but the ones that they responded to the most were probably the playground, the stage, and the shelter. Go ahead. All right, this was done kind of similarly. These are things that are important to them while they're enjoying the park. So while they're at their utility, what is important to them to see, feel, be a part of around the park? So these are things like, instead of, is there a playground? It's how clean is it? How accessible is it? Those kinds of things. So you can see here, I've also outlined another 3 with accessibility, safety, and cleanliness that were the 3 highest. Those you can see have a very high for the very important, and not so high when it gets to the not important. So that was heavily weighted. So accessibility came through as very important. Safety came through as probably the biggest importance for the survey respondents, and then cleanliness. So trying to keep those kinds of things in mind as we work through what we were looking at and how to phase certain things. Go ahead. So there's some additional feedback where people could write in elements or items, or just throughout kind of interpretation of the survey results themselves. And these were some of the ones that were important there. I'll just highlight the couple that are already highlighted up there. The handicap accessibility was mentioned a couple of times in these comments, including one respondent who said that their child was handicapped and it would be awfully nice if things were a little bit more accessible, including the playground for their child. Another one is, this is such a centerpiece of Fortville. Can't wait to see more happening in our park. I think that kind of reinforces what we were thinking, especially with it being so close to Main Street, the things that are going on at Main Street and the things, how connected that could be and is to the park and what's going on there. So being able to have all of those things together. The other thing I like about that, can't wait to see more. You get an awful lot of people in these processes that are, like I said before, maybe don't want change or don't want to see more things happening. And that was kind of the opposite of what we found here with public input. People wanted to see more activity at the park. They think that it's underutilized. And this kind of points that out as well. Last was the trees and the open spaces are the best part of the park. So that was a priority to begin with, because we heard that from some of the stakeholders as well. But it became even more of a priority hearing it from the public. Not to necessarily knock down the trees or lose the kind of feel that you have there on the south end of the park, and also to maintain that open space as an area that can be utilized in many different ways and configured in many different ways, depending on what you want to do or how you want to use it. Okay. So that led us to one back. There you go. That led us to this, which is kind of our overall priority list. So based on the information that we got from stakeholders, the information that we got from the public input, this is kind of where we ended up. We did take some time, run this by FAI, as well as a few members of the town as well. And it seems to agree with where we are. Number one there, sidewalks, bridge, path, and playground. So the playground jumped up to the top. I think we talked about that. And the sidewalks, from an accessibility standpoint, I think are a very important element as well. Both repairing the ones that are there, and making them a little bit wider and more accessible for everyday use, as well as for use during the events. I was at Summerfest, and that little stretch right in front of the where the police were and where Moondrop Distillery was, right where it goes down Church Street and cuts through, that sidewalk's only like 4.5 feet wide. And everybody was walking around all over the place and trying to get from place to place across there. And you couldn't use the sidewalk. It wasn't large enough to do that. So if somebody needed an accessible route somewhere, it really wasn't available to them in that area. So those kinds of improvements, trying to make those things happen. Number two was to improve the gazebo area and the Veterans Memorial. This goes back to both maintaining the elements that we have there and trying to improve them a little bit. I know you guys have all been out there and you've all seen what happened to the original fountain, and that it's now a planting bed with broken down benches around it that you might get tetanus from if you sit on. There are steps elements there that you go up and down from the gazebo, and those are pretty dangerous to walk on today. So improving that, making sure that it's a safe area to be able to come and reflect around the trees, around the shade with the gazebo, and adding in the Veterans Memorial there. There was a lot of back and forth about what the Veterans Memorial may or may not look like. And again, none of this is written in stone. But one of the ideas that we had was taking some element, it's not a splash pad, which a lot of people desired, but taking some element of that and maybe having some water trickling over the monument in a way that would not necessarily be where a 2 or 3 year old is going to go in there and play and splash around, but in a way where you get that kind of background noise of the water trickling, and it adds to the experience and the ambiance of being able to sit there and reflect. Number 3 then was the covered stage. Again, we talked a little bit about that earlier, about how important it was both to the stakeholders and the public, whether that's the summer concert series or to be able to have that accessible on a daily or weekly basis, along with having it for the events that you already have, to be able to have something stable there. You don't have to bring in a rented stage to be able to utilize it for that as well. Number 4 was then shelter and restrooms. I think there's some potential for revenue generation with the shelter, some potential for that with the stage as well. And the restrooms there, either as a combination, maybe with the shelter itself or as a separate item. The restrooms actually, there have been a couple of comments where, well, you'll never get enough restrooms in there to not have to bring in porta potties for an event. Absolutely true. What you're going for, though, is you could have those as everyday and event accessible restrooms. So you could close those off to regular folks during events, but have them there as an accessible restroom, and then just have normal porta potties in a separate area, that kind of thing as well. It also adds to the elements, like if you are going to have a revenue generating area, then they could have use of those restrooms as well. And whether that's, you know, it's a birthday party or somebody renting it out for exercise or yoga classes or different things like that with the shelter, then they would have that accessibility for the restrooms too. And finally, the entry features, which we'll look at here in a second. But essentially that line of sight that we were talking about from Main Street, and really providing an area that's a landmark. So when you're for Landmark Park, so when you're meeting there, when you're meeting somebody there, whether that's during an event or not, you can say, okay, I'll meet you at the front entry, I'll meet you at the sign, those kinds of things. And having that be a place that's a little gathering space as well, I think is useful. Go ahead. All right. Now we're getting into some items that were not in your original packet. So what you see here is kind of an overhead layout, just schematic at this point. Obviously, none of this is written into stone, but it's a lot of the elements that we've talked about so far. So what you see here, and we'll start at kind of the southwest corner. That would be kind of the main entry there. And you're talking about like an overhead potential with brick elements to the pillars. And we'll take a look at what that might look like here in a minute. And something that provides a line of sight both from Main Street, and then as you're walking through it, to be able to see directly over to the gazebo and the area where seating area through the trees with the Veterans Memorial there as well. Kind of moving on a little bit north and east of there would be the playground. Again, not necessarily providing, 4 or 5 different elements or stuff for different, 4 or 5 different age groups, or, having a ginormous place there, but instead kind of replacing what's already there to be able to utilize on a day-to-day basis for young families that live nearby. So just improving it to be able to have a safe and accessible element there for the playground. Just to the north of that is kind of a little plaza area that kind of all the sidewalks lead into, as well as the Church Street alley kind of from the east there. And in the center of that would be a relocated flagpole. Currently, there is a flagpole. It's kind of in the middle of all the trees, and if you blink, you miss it. So this kind of brings it out into the open, makes it a little bit more of a centerpiece of the park, brings a little bit more of a respect to that. And then you can see kind of around that, just to the north and to the west, there's a restroom location and a potential location for the shelter as well. Further north, you can see there's 2 kind of grass pads there. Not berms. We talked about doing berms or some kind of formal seating area. But again, we really felt the town really felt that took away from the element of having that as one big open space, to be able to utilize that for pickup frisbee or soccer or whatever else. If you're having to run around and there's a sidewalk that goes through the middle of that, that's, a danger, and it doesn't really help that feel. Same thing for if it was bermed up at any degree, to be able to then have to run up and down the hills, and it doesn't really feel like it does today with that versatile open space. And then just north of that, obviously, is the stage. We're looking at a covered stage, potentially with a little room on the back. Not a restroom, but just something that has electric, so you can do storage in there for elements that you would utilize on the stage or for different types of things. Or if it's a little space for a green room or something like that, where it gives a place for the band to go and take their instruments or something like that. If it really starts pouring down rain, just different types of things like that. It gives it a little bit more of a permanent feel as well. And then you can see the path kind of along the north. The path would double from the road over to the stage as kind of an access route. So you could pull in there and be able to unload and load and then pull back out. I think it's very important because I know that today there's probably some cross traffic there, especially along Church Street, where golf carts or scooters or who knows what ride along Church Street and go right through the park, maybe even cars on occasion. So I think it's important that that doesn't necessarily get shifted up here. So maybe there are some bollard elements and maybe it doesn't really look like a drive entry, but it can be utilized for that in just certain circumstances when it was needed. Further then, as you head to the west there, you got the new pedestrian bridge that would cross over. Probably wide enough for a golf cart to be able to access the road down there, but still a pedestrian level bridge, nothing that would be driven over by a car or even an emergency vehicle in this instance. That's fortunately or unfortunately a necessity probably at this point to replace that, just because of the state that the current one is in. I don't know how much longer it has left, but it doesn't feel very safe when you're on it for sure. So putting that in as an element as well. Okay, go ahead, Adam. Great. All right, so breaking this diagram down now into kind of the elements that we talked about as priorities previously. Go ahead and click the first one, Adam. Yeah, just click anywhere. There you go. All right, so all the blue there is the sidewalk area that would kind of be, if this was phased out, kind of a first phase. So you can see we got the trail up there, we got some connecting sidewalks, we've got the plaza. We would also do the playground with that kind of from phasing standpoint and bring all of those kind of together and access to the streets, tie in with what's going on there now. The importance of this is a couple fold. I think we talked about the accessibility, we talked about the playground and the daily use of that. The other element of this, there are some funding elements that go along with it. There's money and grants available for improvements to trails, especially trails that have been established as a goal by another, by either Fortville or by the county. And this, the trail up by the ditch actually is on both of those as a desirable thing to have. So having that in those master plans established gives you an avenue to go in and ask for a grant to start that process. And there are a couple of different avenues for that. There's a Greenways and Trails grant. There's a couple of different ones. But that greatly helps, especially having it kind of in that first phase to be able to kind of start the process rolling and potentially have a little bit of low hanging fruit to be able to go get some money. The next one, I think he's already clicked, is the memorial and the gazebo, which is kind of green down there. And you can see where that is. And then he just clicked on the stage there, which is fine. So that's now outlined in purple. So that would kind of be the third phase. Go ahead. And then pretty relatively easy improvement to do on top of those would be the shelter and or restroom. And then finally would be the entries. There you go. All right, go ahead and click to the next. All right, so these are the pretty pictures that we're going to get to now. So some of the schematic elements, this was also based on some feedback that we received. We essentially had some choices for people to take a look at, you know, almost like you're at the eye doctor when do you like this one or this one? And then, well, I like this one. Okay, well, do you like this kind of this one or do you like that kind of that one? So we went through that process and kind of refined a little bit what we were talking about and what the town wanted this to look like. So this is what we came up with for the stage. Again, this is very schematic at this point. Nothing's written in stone. but essentially carrying over kind of a brick element to it, having it a good size enough to have a large full band on stage, but not necessarily overdoing it. We don't need to have a giant stage or anything like that here. You're not going to have 10,000 people in Landmark Park watching a music show, right? You may have 1,000 or 1,500, and we think this is capable of handling that kind of a thing. It also lends itself then to being utilized for some of those smaller elements that we talked about, whether that's a church program or a summer concert series that's a little bit smaller as well. Go ahead. Carrying over kind of the brick theme. This is then the restrooms is kind of on the bottom left. We wanted to keep that as nice looking as possible. Again, we also wanted that out in the open so that there was some good line of sight if your child has to go to the bathroom from watching a concert, or when you're over on the playground or that sort of thing, being able to see them all the way to and from it without having trees necessarily in between was of pretty big importance, or a fence or that kind of thing. So having those kind of with the line of sight, they're going to be out there in the middle, and we want them to look nice and want them to hopefully be hardy enough to resist vandalism and that sort of thing as well, where they're either washable or scrubbable or paintable or that kind of thing without too much of a hassle. So we have the restroom on the bottom left. We have the shelter on the top right. This is a concept for the element of the entries. So this would be what the main entry would look like. It's relatively large, it's substantial. You can see we actually introduced a seating element there as well. So it kind of then doubles as that plaza that we were talking about, or that meeting place that we were talking about. Having that on that corner by the church gives it definitely a visual acuity from Main Street when you're walking from that direction, but also makes it a pretty easy wayfinding element if you're driving. So you know where you're going, you know what that is, you know if you're going to meet people there, what they're talking about. Go ahead. All right. And then this is kind of just an oblique view, again, very schematic of the park. Obviously, it's not on top of an existing aerial, but some of the elements there you can see. So you have kind of the bottom left there under the tree. That's kind of that plaza area with the entry feature. And then kind of directly in from there, you have the Veterans Memorial, which would be a water feature that's kind of in that same hexagonal shape. And then kind of leading up toward there, there's a playground area on the right. You got the restrooms, you got the shelter, and then kind of far off in the distance there, you have the stage as well. And then on the left side of that same sheet, that's actually from the east side, kind of looking in. So on the right side of that is kind of the back of the stage. So you get a feel for kind of how much room there is still and how open the area is to be able to utilize it the way that it is today still. Go ahead. All right. So enough with the fun stuff and pretty pictures. Now the bad news, I guess. So schematic construction cost estimate. I and Eric, who's not here today, but we went very conservative on the numbers that you see here. I would hope that depending on who the contractor is, the timing of it, the type of funding that we have, those types of things, that it would be much less than what we're talking about here. However, my experience, especially over the past couple of years, is that that's not the case, that you want to incorporate certain things for escalation of prices, for the busyness of contractors, for those types of things as well. And this being a municipal project with prevailing wage also leads into some of those elements as well. So I broke it down again by kind of the phases that we talked about. So the sidewalks, bridge, path, playground, everything that was in that cyan blue color that we looked at. $450,000. Again, that's kind of a wag. We just did a playground. I just worked on a playground that is of similar size to this one. And it was around $230,000. It had the poured in place, the poured surface that's fall safe for the kids, that kind of thing, but it's also accessible. And it had a couple of accessible elements within it as well. So it's very similar to, I think, what we were thinking about for this. By the time you add in the redo of the sidewalks, the bridge and the path, that keeps on climbing a little bit. So 450,000. Veterans Memorial and gazebo improvements. This is one of the ones I would hope would be significantly less, but I think a lot of it depends on where we end up with what the Veterans Memorial would look like. The desires for that, the funding for that kind of thing as well. But that's in the $300,000 range. Covered stage and storage, $700,000. A lot of this depends on how far you go with the covered stage. So if you just do the stage element, you do the covering, you do the building, you do the concrete, and that's it, you're probably significantly less than that, maybe $450,000. When you start adding in other elements that it takes potentially to do cross beams with lights, or providing enough electrical updates to be able to host a larger band, or that some of those types of things. Think of the stage at Cammie's Cause this year and what that looked like, essentially with all the elements that they're able to connect things to and have all the lighting and the different elements there. So when you start kind of adding those things on, again, pretty conservative, $700,000. Restroom and shelter. These are generally prepackaged. You can get them in all kinds of different configurations, and they come already made, and you put them together, and then you would put the brick element on the front face of them. Whether those are the thin facade bricks or actual bricks, you could do that either way. $300,000 for those. Again, probably a little high, but wanted to be conservative. And then the entry areas, depending on how many there are. We talked about two, one on Church Street and then one down on the corner as the main entry, which would be larger, substantially larger. There's the potential to have them elsewhere as well, but I think those two, $250,000, again, a little high, but it's right there with the plazas that are around them. So you add all of those up, you get a total base construction fee of around $2 million. Between soft costs, escalation, potential additional for separating them out into phases if you do this over a period of years as opposed to all at once. I think a good budget number to think of this in is around $3 million. I would hope that if you were able to kind of do this all at once, you get the funding through relatively quickly, that it's maybe 2/3 of that, that maybe even with the soft cost, the escalation, all that other stuff, maybe you're in the $2.2 million range. All right. So what's next? Timeline. Our effort doing the master plan elements is relatively done. We will take some of the feedback that we get from you folks here today and incorporate it into a final report that we will then give to FAI and you as well, give you a final printed and bound report that will have not only the stuff that's in here, but also all the backup and background information and appendices and that sort of thing of everything that we did, notes from meetings, all of the data from the surveys that we did, those kinds of things as well. So that'll be kind of our very next step. We also, as part of our service, was a topographic survey to see exactly what's out there on the ground, how it's graded and those kinds of things. That has been completed. We have a draft of it and it will be completed when I turn in the final master plan booklet as well. Next step after that, I think, would be to fundraise. One of the other things that we have done and shared with some of the folks at FAI are in the town, some of the opportunities, grant opportunities that we talked about before with the greenways. I've identified maybe 7 or 8 different potential grant opportunities that are out there for something like this. Some of them, they range from, tens of thousands of dollars, $20,000, $30,000, all the way up to $1 million plus, depending on what you're going for, what your match is, those kinds of things as well. And depending on where they're utilized and what they're utilized for. For example, there's one for accessible playgrounds, right? So they will contribute if you were 20%, if you're 80% kind of thing. So there are pieces and parts like that. The trails and greenways, depending on what kind of grant that you get there, you could get 80% from them and only have to match 20%. So there's different elements there that really need to be kind of looked over. I also think it would be very good as you get started with that to identify some potential donations, businesses that want to get involved, naming rights, those kinds of things. Maybe even selling pavers with people's names on them for that entry area. Those kinds of things also can be very useful in starting to build up the coffer to be able to have those matches made. So that's kind of a next step, is taking that and kind of pushing it forward, starting to talk to the people and identify which ones of those might be the lowest hanging fruit and line up with what you guys are wanting to do. Then once that is done and kind of there's a timeline for that, both fundraising, and then you can move forward into the design element, and then the implementation of that as well. So into construction. Go ahead. All right. So that's all I have for you today. Obviously, I planned on a lot of questions and discussion. So feel free, let's open it up. We can flip through and if you have any questions on what we had there, and start chit-chatting.
Ben, we greatly appreciate your time and effort for you and Eric. I know a lot of time was spent on it. The majority of everyone in the room understands that the reason we are involved is because we help support the funds with the FAI to get this project to fruition. Not the project itself, just the plan. So while I'm okay with us having some questions, basic questions, this is not a debate. This is not a, I hate this, you people are stupid. Or this is, I love it, get started. That is not our decision. That's not what this group does. We are only involved because we help fund this part of the project. So I'll start with our committee here. If they have questions for Ben, you can go ahead.
I'll start. Golf cart's a big thing anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in your planning here, you need a place to park them and bicycles. And also, I don't like the idea of the golf carts having accessibility to the sidewalks within the park. Of course, you're not going to keep your skateboarders out or your bicyclists and all that. And I think that's an issue. But on the other hand, you need to have all the sidewalks accessible for handicap with automated wheelchairs or push wheelchairs. So that's a couple things that jumped out at me.
Absolutely. I love the both the bicycle parking and a dedicated place maybe for the golf carts. I think that would be very good. Yeah.
That's all I have.
I have a couple questions. I mean, I would say that one of the big town events is obviously Summerfest, which a big component of that is the fireworks. And that is where the fireworks are set off. So does Summerfest then get kicked out of Landmark Park, or we have to go to the school for fireworks after the concert portion, or what's the plan to still be able to do that event in that space?
So again, this is, not necessarily my plan, but this specific question was talked about several different times. One of the things that was brought up, and this is just kind of me repeating what was talked about in the meetings that we had. One of the items that was brought up was that Summerfest is almost too big now to be able to have the fireworks there. Like when they cordon off that entire north area, that everybody else gets so crowded down in the south part that there's really not enough room. And there have been discussions, I guess, over the past few years of potentially making it into a laser light show or something like that, where then you could open up that northern area a little bit more, or a drone show, I think was one of the other elements that was talked about. Not that any of those are going to happen, but that was just one of the things that was discussed in that as well. The other thing that I would say is you could still do Summerfest the way that you do it today. You wouldn't be able to use the stage where it's located, obviously. So it would just kind of cut that off
like
how you would do it now.
The stage seems to make sense for Summerfest because there's music, but then the stage is where the fireworks are. So then the Summerfest have to be completely redesigned as no longer a 4th of July event and there are no fireworks. It solves one problem while kind of creating another,
Yep.
I guess.
Yep.
And I mean, that's really the only kind of like town sponsored event in the park. And are we building something that then makes that not feasible anymore? It just seems like we could be shooting ourselves in the foot with that kind of stage location where everyone's sitting. You're not going to move all of those people. So, I mean, I guess that's kind of one concern.
Yep. That was an interesting discussion as well, because one of the kind of items that shifted around over time, as we heard from different people and different consensuses and that sort of thing, was the location of the stage. So it has been on every corner of the site pretty much during discussion of where people might like to see it or might like to have it. And even when we had it kind of on the very northwest corner up there, that was determined it probably wouldn't be okay to even have it there with the fireworks still. So, yeah.
Okay. Then another question kind of around the stage is that all of the summer concerts have ended. So who is sponsoring these concerts going forward? Do we have people lined up wanting to sponsor concerts? I mean, they're expensive to put on. So I guess my question is, are we building a stage and hoping they will come? Or are we being strategic to say, we have people lined up that are wanting to utilize this? I mean, yes, Cammy's Cause, that's one event.
Right.
Are we building a $700,000 stage for Cammy's Cause then? Or do we have other things lined up that, or what does that look like?
Yeah, and one of the elements, and this goes for huge municipalities all the way down to the smallest of towns, and you guys are somewhere in between that. Having somebody that's dedicated to be able to, and not necessarily as their full-time job, but having somebody as a go-to to be able to help with the programming is a pretty important element. And whether or not the town pays for it, having things programmed there benefits the town and its residents. And I think that that's an important element that can't be missed on any project that you do an improvement on. It's almost like if you built little league fields, but there wasn't a little league team or organization, right? It's that kind of a thing. Right, exactly.
Right.
But what you do have is more than 3/4, generally of the population that remembers that fondly and wants it to come back. So you have a basis for making that happen.
Oh, for sure. People
right.
want to go.
Oh, yeah.
But
right.
Yes.
Right. So those elements definitely need to be tracked, and maybe even part of the fundraising element of it too. Yep. To be able to see how that can end up being financially stable. Yep. Yeah.
Close. So if things are to be used for families with their kids on the playground, what would our plan be to keep these bathrooms open, not vandalized? Like, oh, okay.
But we're not to avoid any of your questions, but those are good points. We're not going to solve all of those things during this meeting. It's just things that, and I think that's been discussed in there, more cameras out in the park and some other safety features that, and security features like the special covering on the brick.
Yep.
That makes it easier to clean off graffiti. So I think it's great to bring all your points to fruition, but we're not going to solve those questions tonight.
Any problems that
That's what you're here for, is to solve problems. Good.
But just a lot of questions with this plan, and kind of thinking how, great idea, like a lot of the things, kind of the practicality of it is where I'm maybe like just missing that mark.
So there's also another way that you have to, that you should look at is what's the cost of doing nothing, right? So there are elements of this, it's broken down, you can do certain phases, maybe not do other phases. There's plenty of opportunity to look at that. What happens if you do nothing? Well, the playground continues to go down, probably into further ruin. Somebody injures themselves around the gazebo area. There are pieces and parts to that, yeah, something needs to happen. What elements there that you can pick and choose from, and what makes sense from this? I'm just kind of reflecting, this is, the town's plan based on what they've, the feedback that we've gotten there. So the elements of it and how it works, how it's going to work is definitely something that needs to be talked about kind of moving forward, for sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Was there any discussion at all, and this may be completely off the cuff, about making that like a toll bridge there for the guy that lives just north of it? Some proceeds for all the traffic coming through there? I'm sorry, sir.
Part of the plan was to put a hammock under it, I thought, so he could collect them himself.
I thought we were gonna have an easy pass set up.
The idea gets better. You need my account information for deposits. Yes, I am on the right side of that. Art, anything? Art or Chris?
Yeah, Ben, I think it's a great design, a lot of creativity there. You and your team, very professional. I did have a couple of questions, just for clarification. That red dashed line doesn't represent a fence, does it?
No, it does not. Essentially just the property
outline.
extents of the park.
Okay. And then the two green spaces that are highlighted outside the stage area, is that a turf?
No, that's really just a designation of where there could be seating. There wouldn't be any difference between that and the regular turf or grass that's around it.
Okay.
Okay.
One last thing. The creek line,
Mhm.
that would be behind the stage area there.
Mhm.
Looks terrible. You go to Pendleton, you go down to Franklin, they really emphasize the creeks.
Yeah.
Places to walk, they have rocks, landscaping, hardscaping. We have a bunch of weeds on the banks of both sides. I personally would like to see something done with that to make it more attractive. I think it's much of the same through Memorial Park, and I know we're not here today talking about Memorial Park, but I think if we could create a nicer creek bed of some sort, not asking people to bring their fishing poles and like they do in Pendleton, but just something more aesthetically pleasing as you're walking along that path there.
Yeah, it's very interesting. One of the first questions I asked of Mr. Roner, the town manager, was when we first started working on this was what's your relationship like with the county? And mostly I asked him that because the county is the one who controls that ditch and who is supposed to be maintaining it to some extent and doesn't do a very good or thorough or often job on that.
As the guy who lives next to it, I'll tell you, they don't do anything.
There you go. So, but I think that that's a possibility. Yeah. But I think that the types of things that you're talking about are a possibility, especially with putting in the trail there, the trail side, and depending on how you go about getting the grant money, because some of that can also be used for you can incorporate that trail into what's called a shoreline stabilization project, where you're actually modifying the creek or the ditch on either side to make it more stable, more attractive, that sort of thing as well. So there are pieces and parts there that you could work and weave those in together to be able to have a little bit of improvement there. Again, all of this will take some partnership with the county, but.
And just a point of correction, that is riverfront property. We have liquor licenses relative to that. And my riverboat casino is not here yet, but it's on the way, I'm telling you.
Okay, first, I appreciate you being here. I met you at Summerfest, but I haven't been to any of your presentations here. So, also FAI, I know this has been a baby that they've championed, and I think it's a great start. I have kind of a differing perspective.
Mhm.
I'm a sky's the limit kind of guy. So when I heard you say that we're not expecting, 100,000 people, my brain immediately went to why, right? And kind of to Amy's point, I was kind of a critic about the Greenfield Depot Park. And they had 40,000 people come to their concert series last year.
Mhm.
And they just have one concert a Friday. And they average 4,000 attendees each time. And so I started to kind of make the comparisons to this, right? They've got 25,000 people. We have 5,000 people. 200 respondents here was 10 more poll responses than one of our council elections
Mhm.
by both candidates. So that's a good little base, right?
Right.
And so I have a feeling based on some of the questions that this is going to be not the popular opinion here, and I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I'm underwhelmed. I feel like this is something that is a tried and true green space location, right? It's not going anywhere. And in my mind, Fortville is not getting smaller. And I think that we have a responsibility from a budget perspective to reinvest the TIF dollars that are being invested in our community. And I think this is a awesome time and opportunity to create income for business owners downtown.
Mhm.
And so as I look at this, an immediate concern I have is parking, but we're not going to solve that, right? We're not going to tear the church down and put a parking garage.
Mhm.
So one thing that I think needs to be expressly expressed is that if we're doing this on the basis of getting more business and getting more visitors and making life better for current residents, then in my mind, there needs to be a flow from the restaurants and the bars on Main Street to be, and that music, pull them in there on those summer nights. I like the idea of the golf cart parking spots and the bicycle spots. I mean, because these event organizers need to encourage the use of alternate transportation because of the lack of parking. But that stage, I'd like to Cammie's cause. It was awesome.
Right.
There was a lot of people that came out to that. And I think there's a lot of vendors, and I think there's a lot of bands that would love to be a part of what Fortville's got going for it, but they don't have the spot. And so I guess my point is, I would hate to see us go cheap on this now instead of making the investment for where we're going to be. I mean, I was in my professional capacity, I was in a meeting with Mayor Hogsett from Indy this morning. Politics aside, they just got an $80 million endowment grant from the Lilly Endowment for their parks. I mean, and that's what residents want. That's what people that live there want, is they want great amenities within their green space. So, on its surface, I'm glad to see it. I'm glad we're working that, but I would be a strong supporter of a large project. And whatever kind of fundraising capacity we need it. To Amy's point, if we build it, they're going to come. We just got to build it.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. And one of the things, when we're kind of doing the research on, the existing master plan that for Fortville, Parks Master Plan, and then the other elements, trails maps and those kind of things for Hancock County, and how to tie those in with what's going on with Fishers and where their stuff is. There are a bunch of elements with that are weren't necessarily a part of our purview here, right? But one of the things that I took a couple hours and took a look at was, how would we connect this and that trail to Memorial Park? And what would that look like? How would it work? How much would that cost? So there are, to be able to do something like that, where these homeowners, families that are over here to the north, especially, but to the north and the east, to be able to access that on their bicycle and go over and spend time at the new playground or splash pad over there. that kind of thing without having to go through downtown or the construction mess that's going on right now. I think that's just one element, but there are items like that that can really be done to help enhance not only this, but how all of it fits in together. One of the other things that we talked about was the potential for redoing the street, Church Street or Stad down south, but having that be, whether it's pavers or stamped or something like that, element to be able to connect it from Main Street all the way over to the park as well. I mean, you're talking about 2 blocks. How much would that be to kind of redo how you've done Main Street straight down Church Street and have that as a tie-in? So yeah, I mean, there are definitely a lot of elements like that that you could do. And I like the idea of going bigger. There's not a lot of space here, and the feedback that we got from the town, not like you said, you're probably in the minority on that. But yes, there was a lot of desire to kind of keep it a neighborhood, friendly type of area as well, with some reflection. But yeah,
Sure. And I don't want the record to seem that I want to put a roo off out there.
Right.
That's not at all
That's what I heard.
I mean, that
right.
it's going to run with how it wants to run. Right. But, in my mind, that stage, in the rendering, I saw there was folks standing up. I mean, if you go to one of these concerts in the summer, it's people bring their chairs and they sit down. I mean, the elevation of the stage, I think, is necessary. In my mind, I see that's a rail for a skateboarder to just ride across the front of that when it's not being used. But because then you have the berms and all that stuff. So I don't know. I know I'm going to be the minority of this. But as a business owner down there and somebody that's seen the success that is Depot Street Park in Greenfield.
Yeah.
I think all the restaurants and local businesses would be the benefactors of this initiative. So thank you.
Thank you.
And you're not going to know what you did wrong until it's done.
Always true.
At least that's when the critics come out. Why didn't I hear about this? So we've gone a pretty lengthy time on this. I'll open it up just a couple minutes. If there's some public comment, just a minute or so apiece. And again, we're not getting into debate or any of that stuff. Come on up, sir. State your name and address if you're a Fortville resident.
Jared Heiner, 925 Linda Drive. So yeah, Cammy's Cause, founder, president. Thank you guys for the kind words. We love putting on the event in Landmark Park. Stage location, I think is good because, like you said, we've tried it in about every single corner, and the sun is a deadly beast, when it's sun setting. And we went in that northwest corner last year and the sun set directly over the stage. It was unbearable for like an hour and a half. You couldn't even look at the stage. So I like the location of where it's at currently. But I would like to bring up, your renderings are great, but Adam, could you go to slide 2 on this? The renderings are cool. I don't know what mountain that is behind this stage. But if you look at slide number 2, I just want to bring attention to the fact that that is actually your backdrop. So when you have this big, beautiful stage that you want to take pictures of, you want to be proud of, you want to share on social media, that's what's right behind it. So we put it kind of more centered, looking right back at the gazebo, because that tree line, when it's summertime, is very nice. It's very green, and that served as like a good barrier. But if you go with that angle, you have just those houses behind it. So I didn't know if there was any plan of maybe, mature trees or something to kind of give a canopy around the park. And that also acts as a sound dampener as well, for those neighbors and everything. Those trees can kind of block a lot of that noise that comes out of there. So, and the last thing, just really quick, because we've dealt with this a lot, being in the park the past few years, is shade out there in that open area. Now, I know that kind of defeats the purpose of having it big and open and being able to use for other things, but I was toying around with the idea of like a semi-permanent shade sails or something. But, with those, they can become a fall risk, and, they need to be, tethered to the ground and cemented in there. But people can bring, tents and umbrellas and stuff like that, but it has been a thing. It gets hot out there in the summer, especially if you're doing a daytime concert. That can be really, really hot out there, 90 degrees. So yeah, that's all I got. So it looks awesome. Great job.
Thank you.
And Jared, just so you know, that's what I look at every morning when I leave my house. So if we could partner with the county and do something with that, unless we just buy my house.
I grew up on Leland, just right over there. So I was the second house in from right there on Church Street. So yeah, I'm very familiar with that.
I'd love to see something change there. Anyone else? Awesome.
Just a few questions and comments.
Oh, you're not part of the group. I'm sorry.
I have a microphone.
Oh, okay.
Um, for the benefit of the board and the public, are you anticipating some sort of grassroots funding campaign as a small component whereby folks or businesses could donate? Has that been discussed?
I think that's probably a question for Bob and Milda, but yes, I believe that but I believe that that's already started,
Oh,
is
good.
my understanding.
Yeah, good. I just bring that up because I think it would be a good way to have community buy-in to the project and have everybody chip in. Just a technical aspect to think about, if and you may have already, is I don't know if there are any floodplain issues there because the ditch is there. Do you know that offhand? Or
I do. So the floodplain and floodway line is right at the top of the bank, so that's not too big of an issue. The one issue, and one of the other reasons we'll have to work with the county, is there's a 75-foot easement for maintenance of that ditch that obviously they don't utilize. That comes off from the top of the bank, 75 feet off. In circumstances like this and working with municipalities, I've been successful with other areas where we've gotten that down to about 15 feet. So when you see the where the stage is located on these renderings, that's about 20 or 25 feet off, trying to give a little bit of space in there to be able to make that acceptable from the county.
Got it. And then lastly, from my experience on the Stellar Façade Repair Program, not the RDC one, but the Stellar Repair, is costs really escalated. They were very under, they under budgeted originally when the architects were putting the numbers together, and then the contractors came in with some very high estimates. And my question is, or at least something to think about, is different methods to control cost escalation during the project or very close to when it goes out to bid. Do you have any experience with that with parks? That
I do a little bit. So depending on both the vendor that you're working with, if it's a playground that you're talking about, or the contractor, the GC that you're talking with, you can put into your contract for a couple of different things. One is to get unit costs for very particular things, so that those are locked in, so that if it ends up being more, you know it's going to be more at a certain dollar per widget or whatever, as opposed to they come back and say, oh, well, we didn't anticipate that, so we're going to need more. And by the way, that widget now costs twice as much. You know, that happens all the time. So being able to kind of look at that closely within the contractual realm. The other element with that for like a playground is the sooner that you can lock something in with them and they can have it, like it doesn't even have to be on site. They can warehouse it or whatever, but the sooner that you can do that, the better. Prices don't go down. I'm sure everybody understands that. But I've heard a lot of folks in my industry say, oh, I'm waiting for prices to go down. Prices aren't going down. Home prices aren't going down, you know, those kinds of things. What's going to happen is they will stop escalating as quickly, potentially. So that's what you hope with the construction realm as well. So the best way to kind of save money is to do it all at once and sooner rather than later. That's what that would be the advice that I would give you if you're talking about how to, you know, use your money wisely.
That sounds like good advice. And then I just want to compliment you. I think from a planning perspective, everything was put together very nicely. I thought the use of brick as a material makes a lot of sense for this particular park. And at least just from a planning perspective, everything seemed to be I thought it was very right sized for the size of the park, the location, and the size of the community. So I like to compliment you. It was very, very nice.
Great. Thank you.
Just remember, the longer we sit here, the more value my house gains. So Just one quick one, and I'm confident this also includes infrastructure stuff for the buildings, right? The
Yeah.
lines, the
Yeah.
electrical and all those
Yes.
things.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, the pricing. Yes.
That just hit me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anything else before we let Ben go? Ben, thank you very much. Fantastic job. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank
Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda, review of financials. We don't have anyone really to ask questions of, so.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the financials. Any discussion? Being none, all in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We have no invoices. Any public comments? Public? Oh. Staff comments.
Nothing for me, unless you have questions on anything. Oh, that's right. Phil wanted to bring it.
If you must.
He's got that picture pulled up as he just took it up there. One thing I do want to comment on as far as the ditch, it's not a river. But that is a Stottlemyre ditch. That is the county, it's a county regulated drain. They do have 75 foot from to the top of the bank, back both directions. I was here years ago when they did come through town and dredged that, and they cleaned it out. That is a sloppy, dirty, muddy mess. They cut all the trees and the mud and they dig the silt out, drive across the properties. It's mud slung down the road because you just can't keep that from going everywhere when you're running down the road, digging slop out of the mud, out of the water. But anyway, after they cleaned that the last time coming through town, we made a commitment that we were gonna keep it clean as we can, because at the time there was log jams. Kids were getting down there building dams in the water. So when that would back up, it would, we were a combined sewer system at the time. So it was also causing basements to flood and everything else. And our sewers didn't work the way that they should. So we did make a commitment that we were going to keep that clean as we can, keep the water flowing, keep the sun to it, keep some mosquitoes down. And also it's my understanding that, on your property taxes every year, you'll have like a ditch assessment for Stottlemyre ditch. I don't know if you're seeing any numbers on that right now, because once they clean that out and they collected ditch assessment for so many years, they felt like they had enough in the till to where if they needed to come through and clean that ditch again, they had enough money in their pot to do that. So by us going out every year and mowing that down at least once, that cuts all the little trees and all the brush and just keeps everything flowing. That's allowed everybody's property taxes to, recognize that savings as far as the ditch assessment. So that's about all the maintenance that's getting done right now. But if it was, I'm not saying the county done a bad job, so I don't want, for the record, I mean, they do what they do. But what they would do is they would wait till it got to the point to where it needed cleaned out again instead of doing a maintenance. So it would have been a whole lot more detrimental, I guess, to the properties around and everything when they come in to do it, if that was to happen. So just want to kind of clarify some of that. The other thing is, welcome, Chris. Good to have you on board. A few months back, the RDC approved, it was roughly $100,000, I think it was, for the scooters project. It was kind of a joint project that we were doing with a road intersection paving and fixing that area up and getting rid of the old 67 road. What we did is we went out and kind of bid it out as far as, okay, this is their portion, this is our portion. Boy, it kind of, some of the numbers came back as like, well, the contractor that bid that we were, we had the better deal and the better numbers on, they had to pay more money. And the one they had the better numbers, well, then our price went up. So then after looking at all this and then talking with Alex and everything, it was a little muddy trying to do the bidding process and make sure we did everything the way it was supposed to be handled. So what we decided to do is we just split it off. They went ahead and paved and did their portion, and then we're going to do our portion. So I'm going to go out to bid and get numbers that are just the town's portion. And then you guys will have, an exact number on what that's going to cost. So once I get those numbers back, and I'm hoping it'll be before the next RDC meeting, I can bring that back and ask you to approve that contract to move forward on that.
And we allocated 100,000 for that, Joe?
It was 100,300, I think. Was
Okay.
It's a little bit cleaner with the bidding process and everything, this way to split it out and do it separately. So,
Still the same project, I think.
yeah, the project hasn't changed.
Joe, if this project goes forward, which it will, the issue that was said about the approving the waterway, the ditch, is there any way that we can take ownership of that?
Stottlemyre ditch,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that you'd want to.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about the area.
You're
where-
talking, but you're going back to the park and you're talking rather than the scooters project you're talking.
No, I'm talking about what we just discussed, the cleaning up the landmark Stottlemyre ditch.
Right.
Is there any way we can take ownership of that for the banks to keep it clean?
Oh, I'm sure, yeah. I'm
And
sure the
improve
drainage
it.
board would be happy with us. I mean, we can always check with them and get their blessing, and as long as we're maintaining it and keeping it clean and water's flowing, I'm sure we'll get their support.
It sounds like we already, I mean, it sounds like we have the best of both worlds, Ed, where
Right.
we keep it clean and keep basements from flooding, but then don't have to worry about the funding of the
Well, we're already-
major
we're
repairs.
already funding it
And what we
in our
can,
property tax.
Well,
but if they froze those property taxes because it's staying as clean as it is right now,
Yeah.
then the homeowners are actually saving those dollars.
Right.
Yeah, and the
Then we
county,
don't want to take it over.
county's got way
because
more
they
money
already
than
have
us.
Yeah. Well, what I would like to do, I know things are really getting busy around here and we've got more houses coming in, more roads to pave and a lot of more maintenance. And our manpower has not grown that much. So we're hoping to get more manpower so we can do a little more preventive maintenance. And then at least the section through the parks, maybe try to mow them more than once a year, even if the other parks only get mowed once a year, but especially where the areas where people are walking and getting close to the stream and stuff, we could at least keep it looking decent.
So while you're here, Joe, Alex,
Add one more thing on that, and again, you may not want to go down this path, but Ed, there is a legal process where the town can petition the drainage board to take over the regulated drains within the town boundaries. The drainage board doesn't have to agree. But if the drainage board did agree to give jurisdiction to the town, then any monies that were in the account for the drains that are taken over would transfer to the town. So it sounds like they're holding 30,000 or a pretty decent amount of change for that particular drain. You know, if you went down that path, and I'm not suggesting whether you want to or not, that's a decision for Joe and the council and you all and whatnot, but there is that possibility as well.
while we got you live there, Alex, for the money we approved for the Scooters Coffee, the 100,000 for that work, do we have to amend that resolution, or is it fine the way it is if the town's gonna do that road work, or as a
Yeah,
procedure?
So, I mean, so long as the RDC is still okay with that amount, Joe and I have talked about just the process and getting the project done and the scope of the work, and I'm comfortable legally that we're still within what you all approved.
Okay,
I could bring bids back for you, hopefully next meeting. And if I can get 3 quotes or 3 bids that you can look at, you know, they may come in cheaper than what you've already approved. Or, you know, with the way times are and everything's getting more and more expensive, you know, it may went up a little bit. I don't think so. I think we're gonna probably come in under that number that we agreed upon earlier. But at least this way you'll know, you'll have a drop dead number of what it would be.
well, my opinion would be is as long as it's under the original number, I don't see a reason to come back, just get it done, unless someone disagrees with that, because we've already approved it.
So move.
Put that on the record.
Yeah, Alex, can we just make a quick motion and vote on that so that it's done, or is it needed, or?
Do we need?
Well, and I think Joe's practice, and I think it's a good practice, is that he will come back and make a recommendation as to which bid to go with. And I think that's great for just transparency and the public seeing it. And I think that would be the best course. So Joe, get the bids, come back, explain them to the commission and then any public that's there that's listening. And then just like he does with the council pretty frequently, you guys give him the blessing to move forward with the bid that he recommends. Or tell him you don't like that bid and you want to go with somebody else. You got that discretion too.
I was trying to save you a trip.
I appreciate that.
Okay, we'll
That
just,
doesn't hold up their project. Them opening.
No, it's not
Right?
hold it up.
The front, okay.
Right. They may not have the surface down on the road because that'll be the portion that I'll be doing along with removing part of the old 67 and
Right.
okay. Surfacing that.
Amy
That's
needs her coffee.
Okay.
Yeah, we won't hold up their occupancy on that.
Amy needs coffee.
Yeah.
anything else for Joe? Thank you, sir. Board comments. Did you have some? You, oh, I thought you had some, okay. Anybody else?
No.
All right, look for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn at 7:54.
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Thanks, Alex.
Everybody.